Imagine a man who can't remember anything new. He remembers everything by writing in a diary. Such a man becomes involved in a plan to rob a bank. Whether the robbery will be successful or not will be revealed in the end. The story begins on a quiet summer night with Chris driving on an empty road. His girlfriend is sitting next to him, and two of his friends are in the back seat. Today was their farewell party, and now they were having a great time. But Chris wanted to make this night even more memorable, so he turned off the headlights and opened the roof so he could get a closer look at the fireflies and fully enjoy the beautiful sight. But his friend said, "This is getting a little dangerous. Turn the lights back on." After repeated requests from his friends, Chris finally turned the lights back on. But it was too late. Despite their efforts to avoid it, the car collided with a harvester. 4 years had passed and the world wasn't the same. For them, the accident seemed to have happened just yesterday. Chris and his girlfriend survived the accident, but the two friends sitting in the back seat weren't as lucky, and the regret of their deaths tore at Chris's heart every day. But the poor guy can't shake off this burden, even if he wants to. The accident also affected Chris's body. He would get angry for no reason at any time. Furthermore, his mind wouldn't let him remember anything new. Therefore, he's forced to live by a diary in which he writes down every important task. Every morning, he wakes up and re-examines his life through his own writing. He also finds himself unable to verbalize what's on his mind. He can't help himself. If he likes a girl, he tells her straight away. He started taking classes to learn this new way of life, but even that was very difficult for him. After class, he realized he'd locked the car and left the keys inside. But this had happened so many times that he started hiding a spare key in his shoe. With a regretful heart, Chris went to his ex. He went to see his girlfriend, Kelly, who lost a leg in an accident and now lives with a prosthetic leg. Chris then returned home, where his blind roommate, Louis, had left him a voice note with a dinner recipe. While cooking, Chris failed to open a box, which angered him, and he began throwing things. Chris then punched Louis. He called and he quickly finished his work and came to help his friend. Chris apologized for throwing things around. Louis started making dinner and chatted with Chris. Later that night, Chris went to the bank where he worked as a cleaner. He wanted to become a clerk, but his boss, Mr. Turtle, flatly refused. Even while working, he played with the mop. He lived, remembering a life that was miles away from him. It was then revealed that before the accident, Chris had been a very good hockey player. One from whom people had high hopes, but the accident took everything from him. Chris was doing his work when a car pulled up in front of the bank, and a boy named Gary, sitting inside, fixed his gaze on Chris. In no time, he saw his old self. He recognized his school friend. It was Chris, but Gary was saddened to see that he was working as a cleaner. He then told his friends to go ahead with the plan. Later, Chris went to a bar and tried to talk to the woman sitting next to him, but failed because he had no meaningful conversation. Just then, Gary arrived. Seeing that the girl was smiling at Gary's words, Chris started taking notes. He went, but Gary stopped him and said, "I was your sister's classmate in school." Then the bartender started taking advantage of Chris. He was charging him twice because of Chris's forgetfulness. But Gary intervened and forced him to return Chris's money. Gary is good looking. He's also very confident, just like Chris used to be. While talking to him, Gary took an asthma pump from his pocket. But despite his asthma, he moves through the world as if everything belongs to him. Gary asked him about the accident, and Chris told him everything. Gary encouraged him, saying that while life takes with one hand, it also gives with the other. Chris was captivated by Gary's words. After a while, Chris went with his friend to his family's magnificent home, where everyone except Chris was present. He is rich. Even his own parents put him down. They deliberately ask him questions about his job and circumstances that make him feel lost in life. Meanwhile, Louis accidentally mentions his idea of opening a restaurant, but they treat that idea as a joke, believing Chris is incapable of handling any responsibility. While returning from his house, Louis is deeply moved. He got caught up in it. He told Chris, "Look, don't get angry, I just want to tell you something." Chris assured him he wouldn't, so for Chris's own good, Louis told him, "I don't think you should ever go home. They don't consider you one of their own." Chris remained silent, believing Louis was right. Chris's friend at work, Tad, a policeman, brought him something sweet. He used to come there during his night shift. They talked for a while and then he left. The next night, Chris returned to the parlor and tried to use Gary's lines on another woman. He even tried to appear completely confident, but the woman didn't like his manner of speaking. Seeing Chris completely embarrassed, a girl named Lovely approached him and asked him to tell her about Gary. She even bought Chris a drink. She then asked him, "What do you do?" But he hesitated to tell her his job, and he kept forgetting his name. So Lovely wrote down her name so he wouldn't forget it again. Soon, Gary and his girlfriend joined them and Gary took them home. There, Gary and his girlfriend had a playful time in the bedroom. They started doing it. While Chris and Lovely were alone in another room, Lovely told them, "I used to watch you play hockey and I've had a crush on you for years." She began reminiscing about her hero stories from those days. They grew quite close. Later, Gary dropped Chris home and asked, "What does your rich father think about you living in such a place?" But Chris said that it doesn't matter to me. Gary then asked Chris to go with him to a party. Suddenly, a car arrived to pick him up. As he left, he encouraged Chris, saying, "Brother, you can do much better. This useless life isn't for you." Chris then entered his house, but he couldn't escape Lewis's attention as he smelled alcohol and a woman's perfume as soon as Chris entered. He was overjoyed. It turned out he'd had some fun today. Then he started asking questions like, "What happened? Tell me the truth." After hearing everything, Lewis found something strange about it. A few days later, Chris went to a farmhouse with Carrie and Lovely. There, Chris asked, "Whose farmhouse is this?" Chris didn't get a straight answer. They were talking when a very old man arrived. He told everyone, "What's this?" Seeing them, he asked, "Who are these people?" Gary told his very dangerous-looking Uncle Bonnie to take care of the old man. This made Chris even more suspicious that something was going on. Anyway, when Chris woke up that night, he realized where everyone else was. He went looking for them in the basement, where everyone else was sitting. On the wall in front of them were bank photos, a map of the surrounding area, security details, and it also had a picture of him. Gary then told him that they were planning to rob the bank where he worked. Chris replied that poor farmers deposit their money there. Why rob the poor? Gary replied that it wasn't the poor farmers who had the most money but the big farming companies, and since the crop had just been sold, there must be a lot of money sitting in the bank. Gary was very quick to convince. His words made it seem stealing is their birthright. They're doing a great job. Chris replied, "I don't know, man, this doesn't seem right." Gary bluntly replied, "Nothing is right. Those who have money have power." He then asked Chris, "What do you think? You'll ask your father for money tomorrow and he'll give it to you. You're in the same situation as us. You're a pauper, now you're a pauper." Hearing this, Chris was devastated. His mood soured. He started to leave, but Lovely stopped him before he could, and they spent the night together. However, the next morning, as he was leaving, Lovely and Gary were watching him from the window. This made it clear that Lovely was in on Gary's plan. That very day, Chris and Louise met with the bank manager to get a loan and pitch their restaurant idea. But the manager only saw that they were who has ever run a restaurant. They're just jumping into it without any experience. He bluntly told her that the bank wouldn't be able to give her a loan. She had made a very small budget and that it wouldn't be possible with that much money. But after much prodding, the manager said, "I'll think about it." Louis was still hopping he'd said no at the end. But Chris ignored him, silently watching Callie. He was still grieving over not being able to talk to Kelly. Over the next few days, Chris' frustration grew. That night, Chris called his father to test Gary's words and said, "I need $10,000. He spoke calmly enough to make his father believe he was okay. Then he told his father, "I want to start a small business. I need this money for that." But his father refused. He gave it to me. Then he said, "Okay, forget 10,000 rupees. Give me at least 1,000 rupees. I'll arrange the rest from somewhere else." But his father didn't even give him that, even though he was very rich. He could have easily given him 10,000 rupees. He simply asked, "Are you in any trouble? Do you want to come back home?" Chris was already furious. Now he felt like he was begging for crumbs. That's why he refused and hung up. His father's words had become so irritating. The refusal had deeply hurt him, and he decided to join them in robbing the bank, as it seemed to him the only way out of poverty. He also wanted to prove to his family that he could do something on his own. Chris began helping the gang, with the supplies they needed for the robbery. He even took pictures of the safe to plan how to break it. Gary then told her to let him know immediately when the money arrived at the bank. The heist would take place that very night. During the heist, her only job would be to make sure that her friend, Deputy Tad, doesn't come inside during the robbery. He can come at any time. He doesn't have a fixed time, so we can't plan around that. Lovely spent the night at Chris's house. After he fell asleep, she went to get something to eat from the fridge, but Lewis was still awake. He thought this was the best time to talk to Lovely. Lewis asked her directly, "What are you doing with Chris?" He refused to believe that Lovely was in love with Chris. Then he began telling Lovely about his past, how he had fallen into bad company and started making drugs at home. But he had no idea how much toxic gas was released during this process. All of that is what caused him to go blind. He wasn't born blind, but Lovely became defensive, saying, "No, I love Chris. How can you say that? Why do you think I'm using him?" But Lewis bluntly replied, "I won't let what happened to me happen to Chris." Chris listened to their argument but said nothing because he couldn't tell who was right, who isn't. A few days later, Tad came to the bank to give Chris some donuts, but Chris was deliberately trying to avoid being nice to Tad, hoping he would get angry and not show up on the night of the robbery. Chris said, "I feel like you're doing charity or something. Are you donating these donuts to me?" To this, Tad clarified, "No, it's nothing like that." But Chris was still angry, so he left. Later that day, when Chris and Lewis were eating at a restaurant, Chris, as usual, began flirting with the waitress. Lewis laughed and said, "What's up with you, man? You embarrass me everywhere." Chris, who was already short-tempered these days, said irritably, "Yeah, right. You won't have to stay with me for long. I'll have my own apartment in a few days." Lewis didn't like this sudden news at all. We then see Lovely sitting in the back seat of a cab, waiting for Chris to see her one last time before leaving. That same day, before Chris's leave, his boss, Tuttle, came to him. He told Chris, "I'm very pleased with your hard work. I was just testing whether you'd keep trying even if I told you not to. Now, after the holidays, you'll work as a clerk. Your pay will increase, don't worry." Chris didn't know what to feel. He called Lewis first to tell him. Lewis's first guess was that he must have messed up the house, but Chris told him, "I'm at the bank." But before he could explain the details, Uncle Bon arrived with the others. It was time for the heist. Chris told him, "I've changed my mind." He told them he started convincing them to leave. He thought he wouldn't tell anyone. But then Gary punched him in the stomach and said, "It'll be done today. It's too late now. Everything's planned. We're here." Robbery began and the thieves cut the camera cables and started dismantling the safe. But then Tad suddenly appeared. So Gary pointed a gun at Chris. He pointed his gun at him and said, "Behave as normal as possible, and if you forget this, you'll be shot straight away." Dade told Chris, "Today is my last shift, brother. After that, a new officer will take my place. My wife is due to deliver, so I'm going there." Chris was overjoyed by this and said, "Sorry for speaking rudely earlier, brother." But Tad said, "It's okay. I know you're in your own way." Sometimes anger is uncontrollable. Tad quietly left. The safe was now open and they forced Chris to take the money out. When almost all the money was in the car, it seemed like the robbery was over, but then Tad returned with a donut for his friend. Everyone was surprised to see him again, and when no one else appeared, Tad became a little suspicious. They saw Gary's reflection in the glass window. Suddenly, gunfire erupted. Tad quickly killed 2 gang members and wounded Gary. Then, as he moved closer to arrest Gary, Chris told him to look behind him. But Tad kept his eyes on Gary and Bonnie fired a shotgun at Tad's back. Gary told his uncle, "This cop is finished. Do it," and Bonnie did just that. Meanwhile, Chris stole the car that contained the money. Chris tried to drive away, but the memories of the accident began to haunt him. He was still driving with his lights off, unintentionally, so a police officer stopped him. But after checking that the headlight was broken, the officer checked Chris's card. He learned about Chris's illness. It turned out everything was written on the card. Seeing this, the policeman told him to go straight home and drive slowly. A short while later, Chris stopped on a dark road and opened the trunk. It was full of money. A shovel and cement were also there. After finishing his work, Chris went back home, but he noticed the lights were on. He called his friend and realized what was happening. He realized he wasn't alone. Gary threatened to kill Lewis if he didn't pay, but Chris reminded him of what he had taught him. I have the money, which means I have the power. And if I see even a scratch on Lewis's back, you guys can forget the money, kill them both. Chris told Gary, I'll tell you the place and you can go there. Chris, looking at his diary, told Gary, and he began plotting to kill Bonnie to save Louise. He went to his parents' house, took his father's gun, and hid it in a bag full of money. Then Chris fell asleep and dreamed he was talking to Kelly, who had forgiven him. She said, I've moved on from the accident. You should too. Then Uncle Bonnie found him and began pressuring him for money. I don't know where the money is, but Chris said he couldn't remember. Then Gary pulled out his diary and realized he had buried the money on the same road where he had the accident. Gary and Bonnie tried to force him to take it out, but when Chris saw the shoelaces on the bag, he immediately remembered his plan. Bonnie took one bag and left, telling Chris to get another, but Chris didn't know where the bag was. A gun was hidden inside. Save his friend and his own life, Chris shot Bonnie. Gary was still injured from the night of the robbery, so he was in no condition to fight them off. When Gary collapsed, Chris took his asthma pump. Gary subsequently died of an asthma attack. Chris returned the money to the bank and reported everything to the police, but the FBI didn't believe his claim. How could a man with such a condition be able to plan so much? Furthermore, the thieves accidentally cut the telephone wire instead of the camera. So everyone saw that he had helped them out of compulsion and that they had punched him and entered. After this, Chris took out a loan from his boss, Mr. Turtle, and he still believed in him despite everything. After some time, Chris opened his own restaurant with Lewis. Now, his nature he was also starting to improve. Chris's father and Mr. Turtle visited his restaurant daily. Chris started skating again and held out hope that Kelly would forgive him someday and maybe even agree to rekindle their relationship. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.